All right, folks? Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to How Happiness Thinks, our 6-week journey investing in our happiness. Today we are going to be doing lesson 3. And the title of today's lesson is called The Joy of Having. And we are going to learn the attitude, the art of gratitude, the importance of being grateful for what we have in our lives. And the central question in today's lesson is, we are going to be asking a simple question. Like, until now, we've been dealing with different ways of thinking, maybe about ourselves. In lesson 1, we spoke about how to have a self-concept, how to view ourselves in a way that will lead to happiness. Last week, we spoke about some of the small things along the way, right? The little, we called it the joy of purpose, and that was the general theme of the lesson. But what we wrestled with was 3 specific things that usually are stress inducers for people, that cause them not to be happy, and how to deal with each of those, again, with our mind, how to think in a certain way. And today we are going to deal with the $1 million question. Does money buy happiness? Right? That's the way it's asked as an exciting question, but essentially it's a question we can ask ourselves all the time. Does having something make a person happy? Does having a house, does having a car, having a wife, having children, all of these things are having. Does having make us happy in any way or not? So I guess before we open up our lesson, and we're not really going to read text 1, there's a video that's going to kind of go through it, but I do want to caution and say that this opening reading might be a bit gloomy, and it feels a little off-putting because this is supposed to be a course that's all about happiness. But if you bear with me, you will notice that it will actually lead, over the course of the next 87 minutes, it will actually lead to a much deeper lesson about happiness. Okay, so I'm going to ask you to turn your attention to the video screens as we do lesson 1, as we do text 1.
In 2002, at Harvard University, Tal Ben-Shahar, an Israeli-born psychologist, began to teach a course on the science of happiness, known as positive psychology. The course merged the rigor of scientific research with the accessibility of self-help. It explored how to add joy to everyday life and how to create more happiness and life fulfillment. Within a few years, Shahar's class became the most popular course ever taught at Harvard, with over 800 students. In his book, Happier, Learn the Secrets to Daily Joy and Lasting Fulfillment, Tal Ben-Shahar writes the following. While interest in and study of the good life transcends time and place, there are some unique aspects in our age that help explain the high demand for positive psychology. In the United States, rates of depression are 10 times higher today than they were back in the 1960s, and the average age for the onset of depression is 14 and a half, compared to 29 and a half in 1960. A study conducted in American colleges tells us that nearly 45% of students were so depressed that they had difficulty functioning. Other countries are following in the footsteps of the United States. In 1957, 52% in Britain said that they were very happy, compared to 36% in 2005, despite the fact that the British have tripled their wealth over the last half-century. With the rapid growth in the Chinese economy comes a rapid growth in the number of adults and children who experience anxiety and depression. According to the Chinese Health Ministry, the mental health status of our country's children and youths is indeed worrying. While levels of material prosperity are on the rise, so are levels of depression. Even though our generation, in most Western countries, as well as in an increasing number of places in the East, is wealthier than previous generations, we are not happier for it. A leading scholar in the field of positive psychology, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, asks a simple question with a complex answer. If we are so rich, why aren't we happy? What are possible answers to this question? What do you think?
And that, my friends, is where I would like to start today's lesson. Simple questions, not such simple answers. First, question number one, they asked it in the video, but we'll bring it up on the screen here. If we are so rich, why aren't we happy? I would love to get some answers from people in the crowd. Anybody? If we are so rich, why aren't we happy? Yes, Mark, go ahead.
Okay, my thought on this is, as we build wealth, that requires a lot more responsibility. We find that we're having to take care of all this, these assets, and we have to, negotiate and look after it and protect it, and it takes us away from ourselves, and it puts our investment into a thing or a non-human, and I think that's because of that we're kind of losing ourselves into our materiality rather than into our own sense of emotion.
I like that. And by the way, folks, this is one of those questions. There's no right or wrong answer. We're just thinking here. Does anybody else have another answer to this question? Phil, you want to go? Go ahead.
So just something that occurred to me is that, the state of wealth or poverty, that is transient potentially. I mean, that's just something that comes from the outside. Maybe you built up a business, you inherited money, but it's it's different from something that's lasting, something that has real purpose. If you're rich and you use your money as a means to an end, like charity and helping employ people, that can lead to additional happiness. But I think just the fact of being rich by itself, it doesn't account for a lot of other things. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Leah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that to a certain point, a person needs to have their basic needs met. Like they're literally the basic needs without having stress. And beyond that, it's subjective whether it brings more happiness or not. But I would definitely say that it's much easier to be happy when you have all your, your house, those
right.
material things.
You want to divide
like
having
a certain
into
level
two
of
categories. Income. Right. You're saying you're dividing having into two categories. There's up to a certain point, like food and shelter. Maybe you would use Maslow's definition, like your basic needs met. And then once after that, that doesn't add any happiness. Very interesting. Okay. I think I have another thing I want to suggest here. I'm thinking as we're going through this, maybe it is that very fact. In other words, maybe when we have less, right? Like to go back a couple generations, and you're struggling to have a hope over your head or whatever, a roof over your head or whatever it is, maybe then you appreciate it more. When you have so much, then a little nuisance comes, right? Like let's say mold in your apartment and you can't sleep in the apartment for 3 weeks, and you're not equipped to tolerate that. If you're constantly struggling just to put a roof over your head, so then you can tolerate not having a roof over your head much easily. But if you don't, we take things for granted. In other words, when you have things all the time, you're simply not equipped. And again, it's not even a judgment of like good or bad. It's just a fact that you don't have experience dealing with not having. You don't have experience dealing with not having. Right? Is that another way of looking at it? Does anybody else want to jump in here? Because I actually think the second question is the more important. Go ahead, Dave. Yes.
Yeah. So again, by way of full disclosure, I trained as a positive psychiatrist, but I think it's when we talk about riches, are we just focusing on money? Because I've met people who say, I'm the richest person around because my kids are healthy and I have my health and I get to go out and watch the sunset every week because I live in Southern California and I'm not doing. So I think it's how we define rich. If we are myopic and only looking at our bank account, then I think Mark made an excellent point is, it's a means to the end. But how do we define richness and what does it mean? And what really gives us pleasure?
For now, let's not even use the term rich. Why don't we just use the term having? Whether that applies to relationships or not is a more sophisticated question. And I think to some degree it does. But for now, just to keep the conversation simple, let's talk about richness in terms of having. So not just money in your bank account, but your house, your car, just having. Does having things have any impact on wealth? And I'm going to use this actually, Dave, to transition to the next question, because I think that's the one that's much more telling. Question number 2 is there a way I thought I had it on the screen. I don't have it on the screen. Let me just ask this question, okay? Because I think this is the more important question. So far, we've been dealing with why is it that if we are so rich, we're not so happy? I have a different question. Is there a way that we can spin being rich? By being rich, we mean just having. Is there a way we can choose to shift our perspective? And this is really the question I'd like to spend the rest of the lesson answering. And this one I'm not taking answers on. This is what I want to ask you. And I'm going to challenge you throughout this lesson. Is there a way that we can use whatever we have to actually be happier? So, assuming that it doesn't necessarily equate to happiness, I think most of you agree to that to one degree or another, that just being rich, just having something doesn't equate to happiness. The question is, can we use having a person? Can we find a way to think about the things we have that will actually add in happiness? And that's really going to be the argument that we make in today's lesson, that there are a few different ways, including gratitude, that we can look at the things that we have and that can actually cause us to be happier. All right. Now, in order to do that, the first thing we are going to need to do is to understand why is it that by nature, that naturally, most people, when they look at what they have, that doesn't cause happiness. Right? Maybe nature is not the right word, because I don't know the natural tendency of a human being. But why is it that most people's knee-jerk reaction when they look at what they have, that's not a cause of happiness, that's usually a cause of stress. And that doesn't make a difference how much money is in the bank account. Usually that's a cause of stress. Why is that? And for this, we're going to go into section 2 of today's lesson, which is titled very appropriately, The Seeing See Little. All right? Because it turns out that deriving happiness from things we have is a very, very complicated thing. There is a book, which is going to be text 2. And Leah, do you have your book with you? Perfect. So we're going to ask you to read for us, please. There's a book called Chovat HaLevavot, which is The Duties of the Heart. Now, I know many of you on this Zoom are familiar with that book. You're familiar with that book because of one section of that book that's known as the Gate of Trust. So let me give a quick background to this book, even though I know not all of you are interested in that, but just in case. The book Chovat HaLevavot, which means Duties of the Heart or Obligations of the Heart, was written in the 11th century by a Jewish scholar named Rabbeinu Bachya Ibn Pakuda. You can read a little bit about him in the sidebar. Text 2 is authored by him. He writes a book in which, in his introduction, he basically says, hey, there's a lot of Jewish books that I would call obligations of the limbs. Tell you what to do with your body, how to put on tefillin, how big a sukkah needs to be, how you build a sukkah, how you shake a lulav and etrog, how you dip an apple in honey, what words you need to say during prayer, how you put on tefillin on your arm, and all the different obligations of your limbs, of your body. He says, but then there are emotions that we're supposed to feel that are appropriate to feel from a Jewish perspective. Some of them are even mitzvahs, to love God, to fear God, to have trust in God. These are things we're obligated to do. And he looked at Jewish literature and he said, there's no comprehensive work that helps us with our emotions. Now, obviously, since then, that's changed a lot. Judaism has a lot of works that deal with how to work on our emotions. But his is one of the first and more fundamental works on this topic. He divided his book into gates. One of them, the more famous one that most of you are probably familiar with, is called the Gate of Trust. In Hebrew, Shara Bitachon. Why? Because in it, it's basically a psychological work, how to learn to trust God more, right? But he has one on how to love God, how to love your fellow. And then he has one called Shar HaBechina. And a lot of it talks about happiness, talks about perspectives on life. And this is from his intro there, his intro to Shar HaBechina, okay? And we're going to ask Leah to read it for us, please. Text 2, he brings this very, very telling parable. Go ahead when you're ready.
Okay, a parable.
Page 88.
There was once an infant found in the desert by a kind-hearted individual. The benevolent man took pity on the child, carried him to his home, brought him up, fed him, clothed him, and provided him generously with all that was good, until the child was old enough to understand and comprehend the many benefits he had received. The same benefactor heard of a man who had fallen into the hands of his enemy and had for a long time been treated with extreme cruelty, starved and kept naked. The benevolent man's compassion was aroused. He appeased the enemy and convinced him to free the prisoner and forgive his debts, and he brought the man to his home. The kindness that he showed this man was a fraction of the kindness he showed the child.
And the question that we have on page 89 is, and the question that the Chovat HaLevavot or Rabbeinu Bachya Ibn Pakuda asks, as a follow-up to this analogy, he says, which of these individuals will be more appreciative of the rescuer, right? And the answer, of course, is that the grown men will be more appreciative. Now, the follow-up question, which is why, can be answered a number of different ways. Some of it can just be genetics, maybe, like, oh, the child doesn't have enough comprehension to comprehend all the good that's being done to him. That could be. But some of it can be, probably most of it can be attributed to the fact that the child will take it for granted. And this is what Rabbi Nabati Pakuda really is trying to explain to us with this contrast that you see in this parable. That when you have a child, I'm sorry, let's start with the grown man. When you have a grown, mature man who is used to being taken care of, etc., and then he loses that, and he's in this terrible, terrible state, and then somebody comes and saves him, the contrast in his mind from one to the other is something that he doesn't take for granted ever. His whole life will feel indebted to this person. Whereas when it comes to the young child, what happens is, even as he grows older, even as he matures, and now he thinks back and he thinks about all the, he'll never fully be able to appreciate it because he doesn't understand what it is to be taken from such a terrible state and to be so well taken care of. This is why, in general, children take their parents for granted, right? When is it that children start to appreciate their parents most? When they start needing to take care of their own children, right? It's like, oh, ma, really, you did all this for me? And if they don't have children, they never really will get there. It's a very, very difficult place to go. Why? Because what happens is we fail very, very often as human beings to appreciate the thing, like we take for granted the things that are done for us all the time. It's very, very difficult for us to appreciate things if we don't really know what life looks like without them. And this is expressed nowhere better than by Helen Keller. Welcome, Ron. We're also going to ask you to start off by reading page 89 from Helen Keller. This is such a beautiful reading, and it's from where we get the title of this section called "The Seeing See Little." Ron, when you're ready, page 89, text.
Only the deaf appreciate hearing. Only the blind realize the manifold blessings that lie in sight. Particularly does this observation apply to those who have lost sight and hearing in adult life. But those who have never suffered impairment of sight or hearing seldom make the fullest use of these blessed faculties. Their eyes and ears take in all sights and sounds hazily, without concentration and with little appreciation. It is the same old story of not being grateful for what we have until we lose it, of not being conscious of health until we are ill. I have often thought it would be a blessing if each human being were stricken blind and deaf for a few days at some time during his early adult life. Darkness would make him more appreciative of sight. Silence would teach him the joys of sound. Recently, I was visited by a very good friend who had just returned from a long walk in the woods, and I asked her what she had observed. Nothing in particular, she replied. I might have been incredulous had I not been accustomed to such responses. For long ago,
I forgot the what do you call it? Your phone. It's okay.
For long ago, I became convinced that the seeing see little.
Which I think is such a powerful line. Long ago, I became convinced that the seeing see little. This idea that when we have something for a very long time, we start to take it for granted, etc., might have a lot to do. It might be one of the big explanations for why it is that even though we have so much more today than they had in previous generations, we take it for granted. Because when you're born into something, when you're a child, when you never have to struggle for something, we tend to take it for granted. We are born today into a society that has no smallpox. We are born into a society where it's normal to have running water. We are born into a society where computers and robots do much of the back-breaking work to make the things that we need, where we're able to fly halfway across the world just by paying a couple bucks and getting onto an airplane. So these things fail to excite us. They don't make us happy anymore. They're just things. They're just realities of life. The seeing see little. And even the things that maybe it took you some time to get, and maybe when you got them, they made you very happy, there's something very interesting about the human psyche, is that as time goes on, they will fail to make us happy. So that's why we're encouraging you on page 90 to do this as an exercise. Let's try. Think of 3 things that at one point in your life made you very happy. Write them in the left column. Okay, 3 things. We're on page 90 here. Take out a pen. Write 3 things that maybe you didn't take for granted. And at some point in your life, you got them. Anybody want to hear some of my examples? I'll give you one. The mountains in Pasadena. All right? So in the left column, my first one is going to be the mountains of Pasadena. That's something that at one point I didn't have it. Then at one point in my life, I got it. And when I did, they made me very, very happy. In other words, I moved here. I remember driving around, and I actually remember saying to myself, it's so beautiful. And I remember looking at Chabad of Pasadena. I don't know how many of you noticed this, but Chabad of Pasadena's left wall, the left wall of the shul. In other words, if you're facing the front, all in the left wall, I don't remember who they bought it from, but for some reason with these massive windows, and it wasn't appropriate for a shul because it would be very distracting to see people walking back and forth. There was a storefront beforehand, and so what they did was they filled in the windows, but the top 2 feet or 3 feet are still a window, right? Is everybody familiar? I think everybody out here has been in the shul in Pasadena, right? And it's so amazing. I remember the first few weeks coming to Minyan in the morning and davening and looking out those windows and thinking it's so amazing that they left those windows because you can see out them, you can see the mountains. They make me so happy. It's so gorgeous. And you start to think about God and the beautiful world that God created. It was so easy to do it. And I remember thinking to myself, I should never take this for granted. And here I am. And I pick up guests all the time. I'm picking one up this week. People who come to lecture in Chabad of Pasadena, you know? And I pick them up all the time, and it never fails. When we drive into Pasadena, they tell me, you live in a gorgeous city. And I take it for granted all the time, right? What happens? It's true that having things makes us happy, not things that like if you grew up in a family where you did not have to, struggle for running water, which presumably everybody here grew up like that, then that's not something you're ever gonna really appreciate. But even things that maybe later on we got, and we learned, and that made us happy for a short while. It just takes time, maybe a day, maybe a week, maybe a month, maybe a year, maybe a few years, but eventually we start to take those things for granted. And we'll begin to understand the reason for this by reading text 4. Phil, can you read for us, please? We're on page 91. This is from the Medrash in Kohelet.
No person leaves this world with even half of his desires fulfilled. When we have 100, we want to make of it 200. When we have 200, we want to make of it 400.
Mi sheyesh lo mana rotze masayim is one of the most cardinal rules of human existence. If someone has 100, they want 200. But here's the crucial detail. That's obvious, right? If somebody has $100, they want $200. But here's the crucial detail. You know what happens if somebody has $200? They want $400. That's how it works. Nobody dies with half of their desire fulfilled. Why? Because as soon as we have a desire fulfilled, there's another one that follows up close behind it. It's just the nature of the human psyche. A modern psychologist cites it like this. Dave, you want to read for us? You have your book?
I do.
Go ahead. Text 5, page 91.
As we acquire income and consumer goods that we desire, that is gadgets, computers, cars, homes, or swimming pools, our aspirations simply rise to the same degree, thereby trapping us in a hedonic treadmill. In one study that surveyed people over a 36-year period, respondents were asked how much income was needed by a family of 4 to, quote, get along, unquote. The higher the person's income, the more money they estimated was required for a family of 4. Remarkably, the estimate for get-along income increased almost exactly to the same degree as did actual income, suggesting that the more you have, the more you think you need.
Okay, so far we've been discussing this as a fact of nature, right? We figured it out. It's a 3-step process. You acquire something, you quickly adapt to having that thing, right? And then you realize you need more, and you start on something else. And it's almost it's hedonic treadmill, exactly as he called it. It's really not doesn't even seem to be something people are capable of breaking out of, right? But so far we've just been discussing it as a fact of life. But now we're asking why. On page 92, we're asking why. Why does it work that way? And text 6 is going to try and shed some light on that.
Question.
Yes, Dave, go ahead.
So is this because we allow our desires to be defined by others. Like, well, you need a bigger home. You watch commercials. You need to go to this restaurant, as opposed to saying, no, I'm going to rely. Because I think a big part of this is we allow ourselves to be defined what happiness is by something outside, by advertising, by seeing a neighbor has a bigger home.
That is definitely going to be a big part of it. Yes, the answer is yes.
To seeking, no, this is what I need for me, and I'm happy with it. I think when we allow ourselves to happiness to be defined by others, we are in a precarious situation.
Yes and no. That is definitely going to be a big part of it. Keeping up with the Joneses, marketing, that's going to be a big part of it. However, I want to just qualify that it's not the only part of it. We're about to tackle this subject right now. And actually, Elise, if I can ask you to read for us, if you can unmute, we're on page 92. We're going to do text 6. But you're going to see, Dave, that there's more to it than just that. Go ahead.
All of us can experience the emotional highs that come with buying a new car or reading a child's outstanding report card. And each of us is familiar with the emotional troughs that come with chronic illness. Remodeling the house or getting arrested. Okay, well, maybe only a few of us are familiar with getting arrested. But ask yourself, why don't you stay that way? Why aren't you as happy today as you were on the day of your promotion at work? Or as sad as you were on the day of your grandmother died? It is not simply because new events, both happy and sad, have occurred in your life. It is because you adapt to the new conditions over time. That is why so many folks seek out novel experiences, look forward to a change of pace, or develop new goals once old ones have been met. We tend to react to changes and then quickly adjust to the new circumstances.
So really what Ed Diner is saying is that a lot of this has to do with adaptation. It's this crucial middle step here, adapt, that we have here on the screen, that's really what he's saying. He's comparing it, so to speak, to a pool, a swimming pool. You come into the swimming pool, right? The moment you come into the swimming pool, it's freezing cold. But as we all know, the longer you're in the swimming pool, the less it feels cold. Why is that? That's the nature of a human being. And there's a lot of reasons why we have that, whether evolutionarily speaking or right, or even just the way God created us. It helps us in many other facets in our lives that we adapt to our circumstances. But what that does for us on a day-to-day basis is that we feel that we seek the emotional high. We get that emotional high, but as that emotional high starts to be consistent, it no longer is a high for us anymore. It's just a current state of affairs, and then we seek another one. In other words, the tendency described in the Medrash of anybody who wants 100, anybody who has 100 wants 200, anybody who has 200 wants 400, is an outcome of the fact that that what we already have always fails to make us happy because of adaptation. But there's more. It's more than just adapt. In text 7, let's go back to Rabbeinu Bachya ibn Pakuda, who we quoted earlier. I think we're back at the top of the order here. So Leah, we can ask you to read for us, please. Oh, no, sorry, Mark. Mark, if you can read for us, please, text 7 on page 93.
People neglect to contemplate the benefits God bestows upon them because the sole aspiration on which their hearts are fixed is further satisfaction of their desires and fulfillment of their wishes. Whatever stage of success they attain, they seek to proceed higher and further.
Thank you. So Rabbeinu Bachya ibn Pakuda is adding another element, saying it's not just because of adaptation to what we currently have. He says also, what is your brain busy with? Remember this course? The title of this course is How Happiness Thinks. The underlying theory, the underlying assumption, not assumption, the word I'm looking for. The underlying assumption of this course is that everything that we feel can be changed by the way we think about it, right? So now let's think about it for a simple second. What do you spend most of your time thinking about? How many people spend a lot of time thinking about how happy they are about the things they have? They don't. They look at it as useless. Not the items as useless. They look at the endeavor to spend time thinking about the things that I have as a useless endeavor. I have it already. Why do I need to think about it? Why do I need to spend my whole day thinking about the fact that I have a house? I'm trying to get out of renting and to buying. So I spend my whole day thinking about buying a house and how I can buy a house. So if you're going to think your whole day about the things that you want as opposed to the things that you have, then of course you're going to be unhappy because you never have the things you want. And the moment you have them, you stop thinking about them as much. So what's occupying brain space? I think this is such an important idea. Wanting more is the roadblock to happiness. Right about now, a lot of you are thinking, but hold on a second. So should we not want more? We have a problem here because not wanting more is going to make us complacent. But wanting more, right? And everybody should strive to be better and have more and upward mobility, et cetera, right? All the good catchphrases. But at the same time, the more you think about what you want, the less happy you'll be. Okay? So now we've arrived at a crucial juncture in our lesson for today. Why? Because we've defined the problem very, very well. I'm going to summarize it now. But we have no answers yet. We have no solutions yet. So far, we have just problems, right? As my niece, my 10-year-old niece told me last week, she says, Zushi, I have a contact lens problem. I said, what's your contact lens problem? She told me, I have no contact lens solution. Thank you very much. Okay. So what's the problem? The summary. Why aren't people happy today? For a few reasons. Number one, this is what we've explained so far in today's lesson, and now we're going to start moving into the solution. Number one is we take so much of the good life that we have for granted. Why? Because we always had it. So that's the things we already had in the past. Okay. Now let's move on to things that we only just got. Even something brand new that we just got, we have two problems with that. Number one is we adapt to it very quickly, stay failed to cause us happiness. And where is our brain? Our brain is busy thinking about the things that we don't have. Right? So we're in a space of lack. We're constantly thinking about the things that we don't have, and therefore we're unhappy. And therefore, our desire for more generates negative emotions about our current status. Okay. These problems that we describe with wanting more, they've really always been true about humanity. But I want to make just one more argument, which is that maybe they're even more acute today. With this, we're going to conclude the problem section. We're going to go into the solution problem. So first of all, I think they're more acute today. In the olden days, and I know that's a very vague term, and everybody can choose really which day in the olden days they want to think about. I think it was much more common for people to conceal their blessings. I don't know if it's social media. I don't know if it's a lot of keeping up with the Joneses, which is what Dave was talking about. I don't know if it's just a slow change in nature, but people have begun showing other people what they have much more. And as a result, all of these problems have become much more acute in today's day and age, where anytime you open your phone on social media, you're seeing something that somebody else has that you don't have. Or you're seeing marketed to you, as Dave mentioned, something that you could have, but that you don't have. And then all of these problems come up again, right? Why? Because you try to get it, you think that's going to make you happy. Turns out it doesn't make you happy because there's something else to want. You're thinking about things. All the problems that we have here on the screen become more exaggerated in today's day and age, where social media and keeping up with the Joneses is such a big, is such a common issue. It's all over. It's in our faces. But it's also especially acute. This issue also becomes especially acute, even more acute for an arrogant person. Remember in lesson 1, when we started this whole course, this whole journey, and we first introduced that the whole argument of this course is going to be, it's all about how you think. And then we said, what's the first thing we can change about the way we think? We said, the way you think about yourself. And you can try and be a little less arrogant and a little bit more, little more humble, little more humility will go a long way. We spent a lot of time talking about that, right? It turns out that a lot of the things we're discussing over the course, really a lot of them come back to arrogance. This concept, these issues that we have here on the screen in front of us, which is a summary of why it is that having seems to make us unhappy, becomes even more exaggerated if a person lacks humility. Let's see how the previous Chabad Rebbe, text 8, describes why it's worse if we're arrogant. Phil, can I ask you to read for us, please? We're on page 94.
By nature, a person who has 100 desires 200, and therefore no person leaves this world with even half of his desires fulfilled. The supply is even more so to one who is self-absorbed. He loses sight of who he really is and thinks he deserves more. Due to his perpetual dissatisfaction, not only is his happiness with what he has incomplete, he's actually distressed by it. He overinflates his importance, is therefore always distressed, inasmuch as all that he is given by God, family, health, and sustenance, and the honor he's accorded by others, is not adequate for his esteemed nature as he perceives it. I just had one quick maybe question.
Go ahead.
This summary says our desire for more. So does that apply equally to non-material desires?
I started hinting to that earlier. The answer is 100% not. Okay. I started hinting to that earlier because the moment you start encouraging somebody not to want more, you risk becoming complacent. Okay.
No,
so
that's not what I mean. What I mean is, it says our desire for more, and I read
Yes.
this, and I think the discussion has been more material things.
Yes. Yes.
So my question is, does our desire for more love, compassion, fulfillment, whatever, fill in the blank, but a non-material item, does this
It does not apply.
summary?
It does not apply to that. For example, it can only lead to greater happiness if a person wants to improve their character as a human being. If a person wants to be a better Jew, if a person wants to be a better spouse, that can only enhance our character. And this is actually discussed in Chassidism, and it's a point that I have written down to make, not now, you brought it up now, but I already hinted to it earlier when I spoke about the issue with adopting a new mindset of whatever I have, I'm satisfied with. The risk with that is that you start to apply that to other things. We don't want you to be happy with your anger management. Everybody can always get better at that. We don't want you to be happy with how much you love your spouse. Everyone can always get better at that. And not only that, I will argue a different thing as well. Maybe this is going to open up a can of worms that maybe we don't want to talk about right now, but that applies even to other aspects of the way we look at it. For example, keeping up with the Joneses, jealousy, those are all things that are encouraged from a Jewish perspective if you're not talking about material objects, believe it or not. So for example, if you see another Jew and he's more religious than you, and that causes you to be jealous of him, and you say to yourself, and that causes you to push yourself and say, I want to be more like him. I also want to be closer to Hashem. I also want to be more in control of my emotions. And look at him. He's always, he never gets angry. I want to never get angry. That's a good thing. I know this probably resonates a lot of you intuitively, but you have to realize that we're saying two contradictory things here. When the nature of materialism is that the more we have, the more we want, and that's a bad thing, and you're never going to be satisfied. The nature of spirituality is that the more you have of it, the less you want more, and you think you want to be satisfied. And we have to push ourselves not to be satisfied. But hold on. You had opened up a whole different conversation. I want to first talk about exactly what that scheme was about, because I think it's such an important point. It is a common human issue, and it's not an arrogant issue, that everybody is not satisfied with what they have and they want more. But when somebody is arrogant, that gets exaggerated. Why? Because everything that he has, and again, it's to different degrees by different people, they feel they deserve. So I should be happy with having a house? What are you kidding me? Of course I deserve a house. I'm such a great guy. Of course I deserve a house. So now the next thing that he wants becomes even more exaggerated how unhappy he is. Because don't you dare tell me to be happy with what I have. I deserve that. Remember, that's what an arrogant person is. He feels that everything belongs to him, right? So there's two things that are making it more difficult in today's day and age. Number one, if we're arrogant. And number two, just the scenario that we live in today's day where everybody else's stuff is in our face, from social media, from advertising, from everything. It's in our face. They're making this same issue, which we described in the previous slide, they're making that more exaggerated, and it's now become an even stronger issue. Okay. Yes, Dave.
Yeah, I'm wondering if it's not, from a psychiatric perspective, it's not the arrogant one. It's the one that has no sense of self, that's seeking outside gratification. It's not only the arrogant, it's actually one who feels less secure, that needs constant reinforcement, telling other people I'm good. Look at me, I've got all these material things. So I'm not so sure it's the true arrogance as a kind of like a narcissist, as opposed to someone who has no internal sense of happiness and is always seeking it from the outside. And there's never enough of that. So I think it's when I see someone who's depressed, who's always looking for something outside to make me feel good, it's because they don't have that capacity to feel it internally. So you're looking for external gratification, external validity, external, reinforcement of feeling happy. And it's usually quite sad, because that's why it's never enough, because they don't have that internal sense of being able to feel happy with what they've got, what's coming from within, as opposed to being judged from without.
Okay. So the way I understand your question is you're making a differentiation between two, I don't know the two English words for this, but in Hebrew, there are two words for arrogance. Okay. One is called gaiva and one is called hispirus. And the difference that's usually explained is that one of them is being arrogant, but you have what to be arrogant about, right? For example, for me to be arrogant and say, I'm amazing because I live in Pasadena, and to show off about that, if for whatever reason that was something to show off about, or for me to say I'm arrogant because I have X amount of money in the bank, and it's true that I have X amount of money in the bank, is still arrogance. In Hebrew, that's called gaiva. And then there's a different type of arrogance, which is simply false. Somebody shows off and says, I'm the best at sports, and he's literally not. So in addition to showing off, he's lying. I think that's the distinction you're making here. And I really don't know that would make that much of a difference here to his happiness. Because no matter what it is, whether it's true that you deserve what you have, or whether it's not true and you're just being totally ungrateful, really you don't deserve what you have and you're getting it anyways, and you think you do deserve it, regardless, feeling that what you have is owed to you, even if you earned it. For example, let's say somebody who worked very, very hard for their house. And then you tell them, be grateful for your house. And he says, be grateful for it. I worked hard for that. I don't need to be grateful for that. That is immediately going to result in him being less happy, because if anything he has, he feels that he deserves, that's the equation we're making here. If you don't regard what you have as a gift rather than you deserve, it's not going to lead to happiness. And if you feel you have less than you deserve, it's going to lead to worse. It's going to lead to sadness and anger, because you feel, I don't even have what I deserve. You feel cheated now. If a person works hard and doesn't have a house, by the way, Dave, this is one of the most common sources of unhappiness right now in today's day and age. You talk to a lot of people my age, for example. I know this is a very common for people my age, right? They are extremely angry at baby boomers, and they are extremely frustrated with the fact that they cannot buy a house. Now, this is actually, they're totally in the right. Baby boomers are telling them, just work hard and you'll be able to buy a house. And in my age, in today's age, it's simply not as true as it was 50 years ago. You just work hard and you'll be able to buy a house. I mean, the market simply isn't that way, right? And on the flip side, they feel like they deserve the house. I'm working I work every single day. I'm up 6 o'clock in the morning. I'm not lazy. I'm working hard. I deserve a house. And they don't have the house, right? That might be a justified arrogance, that they feel that they deserve it. But the moment that you feel you deserve something and you're not getting it, that's going to lead to unhappiness. Does that kind of push back against what you're saying, Dave? What do you think?
Well, I think arrogance is having an inflated sense of self, as opposed to, no, I deserve to have these things. So I'm
going with both. Right, I understand. That's one of the Hebrew versions of arrogance. There's 2 Hebrew versions of arrogance. One is an inflated sense of what you deserve, and one is a sense of what you deserve, but both of them are full of themselves, whether rightfully so or unrightfully so. What I'm suggesting is that both of them will lead to unhappiness. The inflated sense of self, I think we're in agreement. It's the justified sense of self that you're like, hold on a second, no, that person, I don't think it's going to lead to unhappiness. And I'm suggesting it might, especially when it comes to material objects. If a person constantly feels they deserve what they have, even if that's true, even if they worked hard and they earned what they have and therefore they feel like they deserve it, no, it's going to lead to unhappiness, because it's not always going to be a perfect equation. And as a result, it's going to lead to unhappiness.
Yeah, I guess the second one, you're at greater vulnerability for it. Whereas the first one, the arrogant, was an inflated sense of self that the world owes him or her something. I think that part of the difference, I think you're right but the second one to me is you're at higher vulnerability, but if you're willing to accept it, maybe not quite as much as the person who is truly the narcissist, the one that's got that self.
For sure, that was going to be worse, right? Okay. Regardless, I think it's time to move on to the solution, because I tried not to spend more than half the class, and we're already past the halfway mark. I didn't want to spend more than half the class talking about the problem. I want to spend the bulk of the class talking about the solution, which the solution to all of this is going to be gratitude. There's no question about it. The solution is going to be to try to find a way to adopt an attitude where even if you deserve something, even if you felt like it was owed to you, even if you have it already, and even if it's something you take for granted, how do we find ways to be more grateful about the things that we have? And the following text, which comes from the Rebbe Rashab, so that's the 5th Chabad Rebbe, has some insight into this, and this is going to begin the conversation about a solution. And Dave, since you're unmuted already, why don't you read for us, please, text 9 on page 95.
When a person pours his feelings of love into words, the act of speaking these words fuels and intensifies the love. Through speaking about it, the emotional energy radiates with more passion, and the person is aroused with more love and fondness for the object of his love. The same applies to all emotions. When they are not expressed through speech, they are reduced until they are completely dissipate. when they are expressed verbally, they augment and grow considerably.
Okay, thank you very much, Dave. It's beyond the scope of today's lesson to talk about the Hasidic approach to thought, speech, and action. So right now, you guys are all saying, so then why are you mentioning it, right? I'm mentioning it because I think there are a lot of you that are already familiar with it from previous classes. From a Hasidic perspective, thought, speech, and action are the way we interface with the world. Whatever emotions you're feeling, thought, speech, and action are the way that you interface with the world. Now, the natural way that works, I'm going to go through it very quickly. But this is just for the benefit of those that have been exposed to this beforehand. I know Dave and I study Tanya. Some of you are in Rabbi Hanoka's Tanya class. You're familiar with this concept, or you've learned it in other Tanya courses. The way this works from a Hasidic perspective is things start on an emotional level. Well, it starts on an intellectual level. The intellect works through emotions, and from emotions, it can start to interface with the world, either through thought, speech, and action. The natural way that works is intellect, emotion, then interface with the world, thought, speech, or action. I think something, I speak something, or I act a certain way, right? But it turns out that one of the greatest hacks that we are given as human beings, and by hacks I mean a way to hack the system and actually make it work better, is that by thinking about something, or speaking about something, or acting a certain way, what we can do is we can actually begin to go to reverse engineer and affect our emotions, which can then affect our intellect. Let me say that again with an example this time, okay? You're not in a happy mood. I say this to people all the time. They tell me, Rabbi, I'm just not in the mood of something. They're not in the mood of coming out to a class, for example. Rabbi, I'm so down about the news in Israel, I cannot come to the class. I tell them, listen, I'm not asking you to come to the class and be happy. Come to the class and pretend to be happy. Act as if you're happy. Speak as if you're happy. Somebody asks you how you're doing, say, I'm doing amazing. You're not. In your head, you know you're not. Think happy thoughts, speak happy words, do happy actions. Why? Because it is the best tool that we were granted by Hashem to reverse engineer and hack the system. Let's bring the slide up on the screen. The same thing is true when it comes to gratitude. You say to yourself, hold on a second, I'm not grateful, right? I don't feel grateful. I don't think often enough about the things that I have. The simplest thing you can do is start some habits. Start some rituals. Invest in some rituals that seem totally contradictory to the way you feel. You don't feel grateful for the fact that you have healthy children. It's not something you think about all the time, and just start speaking about it. Start saying, thank you, Hashem, I have a steady job. I'm so glad I have a roof over my head. Right? A lot of you are familiar with it. These are the exercises that we call an attitude of gratitude or a habitude of gratitude. Either one, whichever one you want to go. Right? In other words, rituals can have a great impact on how grateful we feel. And this is why Judaism is full of those rituals. Let's start with a mitzvah. There's a mitzvah. Many of you might be familiar with it. I'm sure some of you are not. The mitzvah is called Bikurim. What is Bikurim? Back in the day, in Israel, many of the Jews were farmers, right? They engaged with the land. They were agricultural workers, and there were many mitzvahs. There was mitzvahs, you had to tithe, you had to bring some of it to the temple, some of it you had to only be eaten in Jerusalem, some of it had to be given to the Kohen, to the Levi. There was all different sorts of tithing. When you were done with all this, the last mitzvah that you had was called Bikurim. What was Bikurim? A farmer had to bring the first fruits of each harvest to the temple. The purpose of this was not necessarily to gift it. The main purpose was to go through a ritual. The ritual was that the farmer would take all of them and put them in a basket. They'll do whatever type of basket he wanted. A richer person would have a gold basket. A poorer person would have a poorer basket. They would bring it. And he would offer a proclamation of gratitude to God. Why? The purpose of this is to make sure that God's blessings in our lives do not go unnoticed. And what's going to happen is if you engage in this ritual, is it will make you more happy about the things that you have. Take a look at the statements he would make when he would come to the temple. He and the Kohen together would lift up the basket, and what would they say? Leah, can you read for us, please? Text 10a.
And I text A?
Text 10a, 96.
And Aramean sought to destroy my forefather. He went down to Egypt and sojourned there with a small number of people, and there he became a great, mighty, and numerous nation. The Egyptians treated us cruelly and afflicted us, and they imposed hard labor upon us. We cried out to God, the God of our fathers, and God heard our voice and saw our affliction, our toil, and our oppression. God brought us out from Egypt with a strong hand and with an outstretched arm, with great awe and with miraculous signs and wonders. He brought us to this place and he gave us this land, a land flowing with milk and honey. Now, behold, I have brought the first of the fruit of the ground that you, God, have given to me.
Hold that thought, Leah, because you're going to read text 10b in a second. Let me just remind you guys, the average Jewish farmer who brought Bikurim, who brought this gift of the first fruits, right, the first of his harvest, was born in Israel and had reaped many, many good harvests in years past. He was used to being able to feed himself and his family. He was not a slave as a result of an exodus that happened thousands of years prior. The fact that the Jewish people had grown exponentially from 7 to hundreds of thousands happened way before he was born. The chances are quite high that these blessings would go unnoticed. And as a result, Hashem commanded the Jewish people that you have to express, both with words and with a physical act. Bring a basket of fruits and raise them, and bring them as a token of appreciation of gifts that you would totally take for granted. What was the purpose of this? What were we really after? Comes the last verse in that segment over there. Verse 11, if you're following along, text 10a was Deuteronomy 26, 5 to 10. And now we're doing verse 11. Go ahead, Leah. What was the purpose? 97.
Moses foresaw that the temple would be destroyed.
No. Text 10b.
10b. And you shall rejoice in all the good that God your God has given you and your family.
The purpose was that he should be happy. Bikurim. If we want to know what is the purpose of the mitzvah of Bikurim, bringing these gifts, what is the purpose of them? Hashem is trying to make us happy. Reminds me of the Jew who once came to visit the Rebbe. He had been religious in his youth, and he had dropped it all. And he came to the Rebbe, and I forget the exact details. He met the Rebbe on the stairs, and he asked him, "But why does Hashem want all these mitzvahs?" And the Rebbe started answering one way, answering another way, and he kept insisting, "Why does Hashem want all these mitzvahs?" And finally, the Rebbe turned to him, and the Rebbe said, "You think it's for him? It's for you. These mitzvahs, Hashem is giving you these mitzvahs, so he wants to give you an opportunity to connect to him. This mitzvah of Bikurim is the perfect example. It seems externally like a simple mitzvah you're doing for Hashem. Why Hashem wants fruits from me, I have no idea. Why he wants me specifically to travel to Jerusalem with him and bring them in the temple, I have no idea. But Hashem tells us clearly in the Torah, he says, it's not for me. I'm happy to receive them. I'm happy to help you in this process. I'll be the one you give it to. But the purpose is for you. If you go through a ritual where you exclaim that you are grateful and you give something away because you're grateful, you will be more grateful. This is such a powerful idea. I don't know how to say this any better than the way it's said here. Now, obviously today the temple has been destroyed, but the concept of Bikurim received eternal life in Jewish ritual. Elise, you want to read for us, please? Text 11 from the Medrash. We're on page 97.
Moses foresaw that the temple would be destroyed and the offering of the first fruits would cease. He took initiative and ordained that the Jewish people should pray 3 times a day.
These prayers are supposed to be in the place of Bikurim. Now, a lot of you are saying, hold on a second, Rabbi, I know what prayer is. Prayer is when we ask God for what we need, right? What is that? That actually sounds the opposite. That sounds like we're focusing on the things we don't have. But start taking a look in the Siddur. You will notice that anytime we're asking for something we need, which means we're entering a vulnerable space where we might start to think, to dwell too much on the things we need and therefore become unhappy, there is always a counterbalance. There's always a verse or a prayer or a hymn or a psalm that focuses on what we have, that reminds us to be grateful. We're just thanking God, we're praising God for all the things that we have. Let's take a look. Let's go on a little tour of the Siddur, shall we? Mark, you want to start us off? Page 98, text 12a. This is the first prayer on page 1 of the Siddur. Go ahead.
Thank you, living and eternal King, for mercifully restoring my soul within me. Your faithfulness is great.
We wake up in the morning, as we have woken up for thousands or hundreds of thousands of days over our lives, right? We wake up and the same thing that happened on all those other mornings happens. God makes us wake up, gives us back our soul. According to Jewish tradition, the soul of a human being goes up to heaven and re-energizes. So now the soul comes back down and you wake up. What do we do? The first thing we do is we say thank you for that. We thank you for it, right? Every single time we do it, you're going to say thank you, right? What's the next blessing we make? Well, this is actually a few minutes later. We say text 12b. Keep going, Mark.
Blessed are you, Lord our God, sovereign of the universe, who formed man with wisdom and created within him many orifices and cavities. It is revealed and known before the throne of your glory that if but one were to be blocked or one of them were to be ruptured, it would be impossible to survive even for a short while. Blessed are you, Lord, who heals all flesh and performs wonders.
We thank God for the simple anatomy of our bodies, for the fact that our bodies are functioning the way they're supposed to. Now, this is going to happen tomorrow. This happened yesterday, and it will happen for the rest of our lives. God willing, we will be healthy, right? But because we want to make sure that before we start asking for something, we start focusing on the negative, we want to, or things that might make us unhappy, we want to make sure that we focus on the positive, because when you do it, when you say it, when you do it, when because part of your ritual, then it actually affects your emotions, you become happier. The last one we'll quote here, even though really there's so many we could quote. There's so many we could quote. And actually, in the additional readings, one of my favorite prayers is quoted, where we go through so many of them. It's called Nishma. It's printed in the additional readings at the back of today's lesson. But text 12c, the reason we're skipping out to this one, even though we're skipping over many other times that we thank God throughout our prayers, is because this is during the Amidah. And do you know this is the only, as many of you know, the Amidah has the Amidah, and then there's the cantor, the Chazan repeats the Amidah, the repetition of the Amidah, right? There's only one time during the repetition of the Amidah that while the Chazan is praying, we feel the need to pray together with him. We need to say the same prayer as him. You know what that is? Modi manachnu lach, when we thank God. When he starts to thank God, we have to thank together with him. We don't want to be caught on the sidelines not being grateful. Phil, we'll ask you to read this one for us. Text 12c, page 99.
We
Thankfully,
Phil, I'm just trying to mix it up. Go ahead.
We thankfully acknowledge that you are the Lord our God and the God of our ancestors forever. You are the rock of our lives, the shield of our salvation in every generation. We shall thank you and recount your praise evening, morning, and noon for our lives that are in your hand, for our souls that are entrusted to you, for your miracles that are with us daily, and for your continued wonders and goodness.
Thank you, Phil. Perhaps the most poignant one, and this is the last one we're going to, I know I said the last one was the last one, but this is the last one. Perhaps it's the most poignant one, is this one-liner that comes in the middle of Psalms. We're reading these different Psalms in the middle of prayers. Every single day we do this. And the end of Psalm 150 has this one-liner. Ron, I'm going to ask you to read it for us. And we're going to examine it because you're going to really appreciate just how detailed we get in terms of how much we're grateful for. Start with text 13a, Ron.
Every soul shall praise God.
Okay. Now the word for every soul, anybody remember what the Hebrew word for soul is? Neshama. Right? You can see it in text 13a. It's the second word. Haneshama, the soul. Right? The word for soul, as we know, the way it works in Hebrew is that very often you can change the vowels because the vowels are not written in the Torah. And then you can pronounce it differently. The word neshama can be pronounced neshima. Neshima means breath. There's a very powerful lesson here. Ron, keep reading, text 13b.
For each and every breath we take, we should praise God. For what is the source of this teaching? It is written, every soul shall praise God. Read it as every breath praise God.
That's a powerful idea. It turns out that not only are we thanking God for every single moment, not only are we thanking God for waking up in the morning, are we thanking God for nature, are we thanking God for our anatomy working well, etc., etc., etc. We're actually thanking God for every single breath. Now, we can't spend our whole day thanking, so we don't. It's just a practical issue. But we wouldn't be wrong for thanking God at every single moment. Thank you for allowing me to take another breath. That's a very, very powerful idea. For what it's worth, this follows us throughout the day, not just during our prayers. Every time we take a bite of food, we thank God. Thank you for creating the fruit of the earth. Thank you for creating the fruit of the tree. Thank you for creating forms of sustenance. We finish eating. Thank you, God, for allowing me to finish eating, for sustaining me, etc., etc. It gets a little bit obsessive. You know, I'll never forget. There was once somebody who made a mistake. He wanted to say something derogatory about a Chabad rabbi, online post somewhere, whatever it was. And he said, these Chabad rabbis are walking around the whole day saying, Baruch Hashem. And the Chabad rabbi took it as the biggest compliment. He's like, yes, any time, at any day that you will ask me how I am doing, I will tell you, Baruch Hashem, thank God. You know why? Because you give me an opportunity to thank God, and I will. And I will. There are stories that go back to the beginnings of Hasidism this way. where the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of Hasidism, would walk around, he would ask people purposely. He had no interest in knowing how they're doing. He would ask, excuse me, sir, how's your day going? To give them an opportunity to thank God. Why? Because the more we thank God, the more it affects us and it turns us into happy people. You know, this attitude is so connected with Judaism that it's actually the origin of the very word. Judaism, Jews. You know why we're called that? Anybody know? First, let's talk about it. Jews in Hebrew as well is Yehudim, right? Or
Judah.
Judaism is Yahadut. The word Judaism or Jews comes from the name, the etymology we could talk about at a different time, but it comes from the name of Leah's
Judah.
fourth son. Leah being one of the patriarchs, her fourth son being Yehuda, was the fourth of the 12 tribes. And Yehuda later became Yehudim. Why? Because his descendants had a kingdom and they were called the Yehudim. But anyways, without getting into the whole etymology. What does the name Yehuda mean? Right? The name Yehuda comes because when Leah had her fourth son, she realized she now had more than a quarter of the 12 tribes. Remember, Jacob had 4 wives. So by any natural way of looking at it, you would think each one would have 3 kids, and that would be the 12 tribes. But it turns out Leah had more, but she had a 4th one. And she said, Hapam Odeh Hashem, now I will thank God, because now I've gotten even more than my portion. And therefore she called his name Yehuda. Take a look at text 14. This became the name of the Jewish people because we want to ingrain within ourselves that we should be thankful. Dave, can you read for us, please? Text 14. We're on page 100. There you go.
Yeah. Upon naming her fourth son Judah,
Judah.
which means recognition and gratitude, Leah became the first person to express gratitude to God for deliverance. All of Israel goes by this name because the power of the Jewish people is that they recognize how everything comes from God, their deliverer, and they express their gratitude to him for it.
Thank you, Dave. This tradition, this Jewish tradition, it's also very, very rich with sources of opportunities that we have to show and express gratitude, not just to God, but to other human beings. For example, did you know that the fifth of the 10 Commandments, honor thy father and mother, according to many opinions, the whole basis of this mitzvah is in order to stop being ingrates, to become more grateful. Elise, can you read for us, please? Text 15. This is from the Sefer HaChinuch. He's one of the rationalists who explains the reasons behind mitzvahs. Go ahead, page 101. Elise Iser. Can you read for us? Text 15.
Okay.
Go ahead.
The foundations of the mitzvah of honoring parents is that it is proper to acknowledge and repay the kindnesses that one has received and not to be an uncouth ingrate. For ungratefulness is a dreadful character flaw that is an anathema before God and man.
Thank you. So it turns out it's not so much about who you're being grateful to. It's about you being grateful. That attitude will go a long way to you being happy. You should be grateful to God for sure. That's the most important. But it turns out being grateful to other human beings is very important. And Judaism would take it even one step further, even being grateful to inanimate objects. I'm grateful for the chair that I sit in. I'm grateful for the table that I have. Inanimate objects. If an inanimate object somehow saves your life, you should be grateful, or does so, or helps you in some way, you should be grateful for that object. Take a look at this story with Moses and take a look how far gratitude goes. Ron, you're up. Text 16.
Because the Nile protected Moses when he was cast into it, he therefore did not strike it to initiate the plagues of blood and frogs. Aaron did so instead.
Text 16 is Rashi. Comes to the first plague, right? And God tells Moses, one of you guys needs to hit the Nile, and it's going to turn from water into blood, right? But then when we see who actually did it, it turns out it's Aaron, not Moses. Why not Moses? Moses did all the other plagues. Why this one did Aaron do? The reason that Aaron did it is because Moses had been saved by the Nile River. I don't want to get into the whole history here, but I think most of you are familiar with it. And when he was a child, he was put in a basket in the river, etc., right? Because of the plague that Pharaoh had, because of the decree that Pharaoh had, etc. So therefore, years later, I mean like 80 years later, When Moses comes, he's redeeming the Jewish people and he's doing a miracle. And actually, the Nile should be happy to be involved in the miracle. But it happens to be that he needs to hit the Nile River. Moses could not be the one to do it. Why? How can you hit something that saved you? Gratitude is so powerful that we have to make sure to make it a ritual in our lives to thank and be grateful as much as possible for the things that we have. Thankful to God, thankful to other people, thankful to the inanimate objects around us, thankful now, thankful tomorrow, thankful for the things that are a big deal, thankful for the things that are a tiny deal, thankful for the things that we take for granted. Why? Because the more we express gratitude, like that farmer with Bikurim, the happier we will become. I will say that many of you are familiar with the fact that I have made a ritual of thanking. I think this is a ritual that many of you might be familiar with, and I don't remember if anybody on this particular Zoom made this comment to me, but many people that have donated to the Pasadena Jewish Academy have made this comment to me in the past. What's the comment? Rabbi, what are you sending me thank you letters? The whole day you send me thank you letters. And I make a point very often of writing a little note together with the thank you letter, oh, thank you so much. Whatever you want to take on the raffle, I'll help you win, whatever. I'll write something, And especially those that are part of, we have a club called Club 54. It's people who give money on a monthly basis. Every single month, they give a certain amount, $54, $540, $5,400. We don't have any of those yet. We're looking for them. If anybody wants to get $5,400 a month, you're welcome to join. Anyways, people are given on a monthly basis. And they're like, Rabbi, save the paper, save the pen, save the stamp, save the ink, save the envelope. It'll be more for Chabad. I said to him, listen, you're right. You are right. I said, but I need you to understand what it does for me. Think about it. Right now on my desk, as very often, I don't keep a lot of things on my desk. I'm not one of these messy people. I don't keep a lot of things on my desk, but very often what's on my desk is a list of letters that I have to send to people to thank them, and they're auto-generated from the system, etc. But I make a point of signing them all with my hand. I make a point of sometimes writing a thing. What was that? And then I lick them and I stuff them myself, because that ritual is very, very beneficial for me. Think about that gratitude that I feel while I'm doing. There's somebody who cares about the vision that I care about. I'm not in this alone. I'm partnered together with somebody. We're bringing this to life, etc. And we need more rituals like this in our lives, because the more rituals we have like this, the happier we become. When a person builds that gratitude into their life, the result is similar to the farmer with Bikurim. Let's take a look at some of the psychological evidence for this. Text 17a. Leah, I think we're back up at you. The magnitude of gratitude, text 17a. Page 102.
In 1998, my colleague Mike McCullough and I designed a program of research to examine the effects of a gratitude practice on psychological and physical well-being. In our first study, we randomly assigned college student participants one of three tasks. They either briefly described in a single sentence 5 things they were grateful for, the gratitude condition, 5 hassles, the hassles condition, or 5 events or circumstances that affected them, events condition. Hassles are relatively minor, everyday stressful circumstances, such as not being able to find a babysitter, dealing with the rising price of gas, doing laundry, misplacing one's wallet. The time frame for each of these was the past week. Participants completed these exercises along with a variety of other measures of health and happiness once per week for 10 consecutive weeks. The results were quite striking and garnered considerable media attention. Participants in the gratitude condition felt better about their life as a whole and were more optimistic about the future than participants in either of the other control conditions. To put it into numbers, they were a full 25% happier than the other participants. Those in the gratitude condition reported fewer health complaints and even spent more time exercising. Something as simple as counting blessings once a week resulted in significant emotional and health benefits.
So this is a pretty straightforward study, right? They take these 3 groups, right? And the results were that those who wrote down that they were grateful were, things that they were grateful for. In other words, they went through some form of a ritual of gratitude, were immediately 25% happier. It turns out that something as simple as counting our blessings once a week can result in significant emotional and health benefits. Let's keep going over here, page 103, because obviously we need some practical tips here. Dave. Text, I'm sorry. Okay, you read. Go ahead. Text 17b. I sometimes I mix up the windows and I mix up the order, and I hope everybody forgives me if I didn't give you too much to read or too little to read or whatever it is. I'm doing my best here.
Okay. One of the most effective ways to deepen your own gratefulness is to write a letter of gratitude to an important person in your life whom you've never properly taken the time to thank, and then visit that person to present him or her with the letter. What was the effect of composing and delivering the letter for those who participated in the experiment? When their moods were measured after 1 week of doing the assigned exercises, participants were happier and less depressed. This boost in happiness and decrease in depressive symptoms were maintained at follow-up assessments 1 week and 1 month later. It turns out that a gratitude visit is one of the exercises that made people lastingly less depressed and happier than other positive psychology interventions.
Okay, so you get there are different types of rituals. Hopefully you can take some ideas from what we discussed here. I think most of you are getting an idea of what the exercise is going to be, right? At this course, we said we always leave you with an exercise to try to make you happier this coming week. I think you can see where we're headed with it already, right? But in figuring out ways to stick in habits, rituals to make us more grateful will automatically lead to more happiness. There's a reason for this, okay? There's a reason for this. It's not just, like we said earlier, you're focusing on what you have, not focusing on what you're needed for, etc. Every time you're grateful, you have to be grateful to someone, right? Now, that someone could be God, that someone could be a person, that someone could be a thing, right? But you have to be grateful to someone. Why is that such an important factor? In order to explain, let's do the following exercise. Okay, you can follow with this either in your book on page 104 or on the screen here in front of me. Let's contrast two different people. Each one currently has X amount of money. They're about to be $5,000 richer. The difference is that Miriam wins $5,000 in the lottery, and it's going to cover her daughter's college expenses. She's very, very happy. Sarah accepts a $5,000 gift from a member of her synagogue who heard that she can't cover her daughter's college expenses and chose to reach out and give her $5,000. Oh, beautiful. They both had the same amount of money beforehand. They both had the same amount of living expenses. They both have one issue on the table, which is they cannot pay for their daughter to go to college. The difference is that one of them got the $5,000 from the lottery. The other one got the $5,000 as a gift. Now, on a very economical, from an economist's perspective, you look at these things yourself, they're both in exactly the same situation. They didn't have $5,000, now they have $5,000. They both needed $5,000, and they had the $5,000. Boom, exactly the same. But let me ask you guys a question. All else being equal, whose good fortune do you think will bring them more happiness? And more importantly, why? Anybody want to jump in here? Dave, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess what I would say is if Miriam felt like God granted me this, that I'm going to thank God that he allowed me to win the lottery, as opposed to it was some random thing like the numbers were I think it's the context. The context, I think, oftentimes goes on how we view something. From a religious perspective, I think it's God was behind all of them. God was kind enough to let me win the lottery and allow me to play the lottery, or God brought this benevolent person in to give me the money.
Thank you very much. But as usual, Dave, you're jumping one step ahead. First, let's take it at face value. Assuming that you just treat Miriam's story as luck, without getting to the God aspect, which was very important, what Dave mentioned, then automatically Sarah is actually getting more than Miriam gets. Why? Because they're both getting $5,000, but Sarah is also getting a very warm and very cuddly feeling of someone else caring for her. In other words, in addition to getting the $5,000, she also has this feeling of security and trust and care. That is someone else saying, I care about you, and I don't just care about you, but I care about you so much that I'm willing to give you $5,000, right? So how, and this is where Dave was going, how can we reverse it? How can we be Miriam and win a $5,000? First of all, I don't know how we can be Miriam and win $5,000 in the lottery. If anybody knows how to do that, let me know. But once you win $5,000 in the lottery, how can you have the same feeling that Sarah has? It's exactly as Dave pointed out. If we can begin to appreciate that even when we get it by chance, by luck, right? We can begin to appreciate that comes from Hashem and feel a sense of gratitude to Hashem, just as we feel a sense of gratitude if somebody gives it to us. Then what happens is that ritual that ritual drives home to us, not just because we're focusing on what we have and not on what we want, but it actually makes us feel happier because it makes us feel cared for. Because gratitude means there's always somebody you're having gratitude to. There's always a giver. And that giver is showing care for you, whoever that giver is, even if the giver is a rock or a river. If you actually feel a sense of gratitude to the river, it means you also feel that somebody cares about you. God cares about me. These other human beings care about me. These inanimate objects care about me, etc., etc. And therefore, that gratitude takes us a long way towards happiness. Okay. We are going to skip the next little section about Jacob and Esau. It's a very good
One
point.
quick question. Well,
Hold, Dave, hold on just 1 second. I'm going to hold questions just for now because we have a very important point we still need to address, and we're short on time. But I will take your question in exactly 12 minutes at 2:30. We are going to skip the next section for lack of time. It's a pretty powerful point, but it's not. It doesn't take away from the flow here about Jacob and Esau, and it really just shows that Jacob had this attitude all the way back at the beginning. Jacob had an attitude of gratitude, and Esau did not. But leaving all that aside for now, I think we need to address, before we're going to end today's lesson, we need to address why it's so difficult for us. Why is it, and this goes on all levels, by the way. It turns out saying thank you is a difficult thing, more difficult than maybe we ascribe to it, but certainly doing more than saying thank you. Buying somebody a thank you gift, going to visit someone and saying thank you to them, writing a whole letter of gratitude to someone. It turns out it is a difficult thing to do. It's not an easy thing for us to do. And maybe it'll become a little easier for us on this Zoom and those watching the recording. Why? Because now we appreciate just how much benefit there is in it for us. But still, it behooves us, if we are going to try and make this a part of our lives, it behooves us to begin to try and appreciate why is it so difficult. And once we appreciate why it's so difficult, then maybe we can work on it, right? Okay. So in order to appreciate why it's so difficult, we have to begin to address the cynicism that begins to creep into us the moment we are called upon to be thankful to someone else. Ron, if you can read for us, please, text 19. This comes to us from the Talmud, Tractate Brachot, and it describes the difference between a good guest and a bad guest, right? Everybody always knows that every Jewish mother wants their child to be a mensch. What does it mean to be a mensch? Here's the text. It describes a mensch and a non-mensch. What's the difference? Go ahead, text 19.
What does a good guest say? How much trouble the host took for my sake, how much meat he brought before me, how much wine he brought before me, how many fine rolls he brought before me, and all the trouble that my host took was only for my sake. What does a bad guest say? What trouble did this host take? I ate one piece of bread. I ate one slice. I drank one cup. Any trouble that this host took was only for his wife and children.
This is a pretty lengthy text. There's two full paragraphs here, and there is so much to be analyzed. So what I need you guys to do is to take your head off and screw on what we call your Gemara cup. The Gemara cup is your head that thinks in a Talmudic way. Start analyzing these two texts. All right, on page 106, an exercise. You'll see how important this exercise is in just a moment. Like if it seems very nitty-gritty to you, you'll see in just a moment. I want you to list for me how many differences you can see before we get to the significance. Just list for me differences. Differences that you see between the way the good guest speaks and the bad guest speaks. All right, take out a pen, analyze. You have them both in front of you. It's text 19. And then on the next page, at page 106, write down as many differences as you can see. I'll give you 60 seconds, and then we'll start to analyze them. You'll soon see why it's so important. I'm not going to ask for the results just for time, but I'll give you another 30 seconds, and then we'll go through some of them that we have found on the screen in front of you. The good guest speaks always. A good guest is someone who's grateful, right? Obviously. The bad guest struggles with gratitude. The good guest, everything that he sees plays into his gratitude. And he speaks a certain way in order to be more grateful. The bad guest is always looking for reasons why this wasn't even such a big deal, and I don't need to be grateful for it. Let's go through it. The good guest, when he says how much trouble the host took, he says, for my sake. The bad guest doesn't like to personalize it. He doesn't want to personalize it. He says, hey, trouble that he took, as if he's talking about something. He took the trouble for you. What's the significance? The bad guest implies that the host wasn't troubled at all. The good guest is how much trouble the host took, right? For my sake. The bad guest says, what trouble did this host take? Again, trying not to personalize it. He's implying that I'm not cynical. I'm not cynical about everyone. In this case, this particular host was taking a lot of trouble. I don't know why he took that trouble, right? But a good host says, no. He did amazing. In other words, I refuse to be cynical, not about him and not about any host, right? The good guest starts off mentioning meat, then wine, then followed by fine rolls. But the bad guest mentions the bread first. Why? Because the bad guest is trying to mask the expensive food. He doesn't want to talk about the wine and the meat. He starts off as if he only gave me bread. I guess he has to mention all the facts. He mentions the wine and the meat as well. But he prefers to talk about it as if it wasn't such a big deal. And in this vein, over and over again, the bad guest calls it just a slice in a cup. He doesn't want to mention food, meat and wine. The good guest focuses on the attitude that the host offered it to him, whereas the bad guest focuses only the fact that he happens to have eaten, almost ignoring the fact that there was a host, right? The good guest is implying that they were offered even more than he ate. The good guest focuses on how he brought it to me. The bad guest just focuses on ate, as if it's all just centered around me. It has nothing to do with the host. The good guest assumes that were it not for me, the guest probably wouldn't even have had a meal. He probably would have microwaved some burnt food or something. I don't know, right? And the whole meal is for me. But the bad guest assumes that he was making a big meal and probably would have been leftovers. I just happen to be eating that part. Cynical and cynical and cynical. Where does all this come from? It turns out every single one of us, the moment we are given something, we turn into the bad guest. We look for every single reason why we don't need to be thankful. Why? Why is it so difficult to maintain an attitude of gratitude? The answer is in text 20. From a Talmudic perspective, we already saw it, but the psychologists are going to explain this, and they're going to give us the proper psychological background. Mark, if you can read for us, please, text 20 on page 107.
We don't like being reminded that we needed help. We don't want to be beholden to our saviors. Gratitude would seem to pose a challenge for this reason alone. Gratitude can be a bitter pill to swallow, humbling us and demanding, as it does, that we confront our own sense of self-sufficiency. So we may avoid it as we would avoid going to the doctor for the annual prostate exam.
When something is uncomfortable, we don't like doing it. Hence the prostate exam analogy, right? It boils down to our willingness to recognize that we are dependent beings. Remember how I told you that today's entire lesson is going to be informed by lesson 1 when we spoke about the importance of humility? Humility, it turns out, is the key to being grateful. If we are arrogant and we refuse to accept that we are dependent beings, then it will be very difficult for us to be grateful. My favorite example for this is, imagine if you fight with your spouse, you fight with a loved one, or you fight with your children, whatever it is, right? Fight with your parents. You're a teenager and you're fighting with your parents, right? So upset at them that you're not speaking to them, etc. Right? What happens? It becomes difficult at the dinner table for you to ask them to pass you the water. This is the stupidest thing. You'll get up easier and go get the water yourself than to ask your dad for the water after you were so upset at him because he embarrassed you or whatever it is that as a teenager you're upset at your dad about. Right? Why? Because asking him for the water admits your dependence on him. Never mind, if he passes you the water, saying thank you, not even a chance in hell that this teenager is going to say thank you to his dad after they just finished fighting bitterly and he's so upset at him. Why? Because to say thank you is to acknowledge my dependence on you. Now you come and you explain to me logically, are you kidding me? You're not dependent on him. He just passed you the water. It was inconvenient. You're going to get up, you're going to go get the water. He could pass you the water. It's so simple. But what happens is when arrogance kicks in, right? You don't, in this instance, when you're upset at someone, you don't want to be dependent on them. And as human beings, we naturally have a sense of arrogance in us, in a sense of personal, we call it sometimes self-dignity, but it's not self-dignity. It's actually the nefesh habahamit that wants us to feel. There's this term that's used about Pharaoh. I'll explain it in a moment. We want to feel as if everything we have comes from me. And it might even be true. Could be you could do everything yourself. But that will ultimately always stand in the way of gratitude. I said I was going to say about Pharaoh. Let me explain. The verse, there's a verse way later, not in Exodus, in one of the prophets, I think it's in Ezekiel, that describes Pharaoh as saying, Li Yaor va'ani asisani. The Nile is mine, and I created myself. And all the commentary there discuss the arrogance that Pharaoh had. And it all really boils down to a verse in Exodus itself. What is the verse in Exodus? It says, in the beginning of Exodus, one of the first words, it says, "Vayakam melech chadash al Mitzrayim asher lo yada et Yosef." There was a new king who arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. Okay, now there's a discussion in the commentary about whether the old king died and this was actually a new pharaoh, or whether it was the same king but he died in that he pretended not to remember Joseph. But either way, that last fact is true. Let me explain to you something. Joseph was not an obscure character in the history books of Egypt. Joseph was the prison boy who was taken out of prison, became viceroy of Egypt, and saved the entire Egypt from a famine. Right? I don't know how many of you remember the book of Genesis and all the different parshas, etc. If you don't remember it, we're about to read it again. We're starting again soon with Simchat Torah. We're going to start to go through it. The whole story of Joseph. I don't know how many of you watched Joseph and the Technicolor Dreamcoat, but in that story, Joseph literally saves the entire Egypt from a famine. He has them collecting during the years of plenty, and they put it in storage houses, and he supports the entire Egypt. It could have been 500 years later, which it was not. It was a handful of years later. But it could have been 500 years later. What does it mean that Pharaoh didn't know who Joseph was? A major character in Egypt's history. The entire world, the entire Middle East over there, is coming to, which was the whole world at the time, is coming to Egypt to get food because there's famine everywhere. That's what brings Jacob and his children down to Egypt, right? They're all coming. Egypt became a superpower, you could argue, because of Joseph. And this king doesn't know who Joseph is? It's impossible. The answer is that Pharaoh, who, by the way, Kabbalistically, literally stands for arrogance, didn't want to know who Joseph is. He was choosing not to know who Joseph is. He was giving in to the cynicism within him and saying to himself, oh, if I acknowledge what Joseph did, then I have to be grateful to Joseph. Then I actually have to think about what he did for us, and I have to thank him, and I have to acknowledge the fact that he's Jewish, and the fact that I have to be the whole slavery in Egypt, it turns out, can be boiled down to the arrogance of Pharaoh and the fact that he refused to acknowledge the good that was done to his people by Joseph. Vayakam melech chadash al Mitzrayim are the opening words of the entire book of Exodus, which is going to describe first the slavery of Egypt. The whole saga begins, and we know the Torah doesn't tell us all details. But one of the first details the Torah needs to tell us is Vayakam melech chadash, a new king arose who had an issue with gratitude. And because he had an issue with gratitude, everything else went a slippery slope from there. Is it any, if you refuse to acknowledge that Joseph and the Jewish people actually saved Egypt, is it any surprise that it starts a slippery? Okay, then it's like we don't care that much about the Jewish people. Then they're foreigners. Then they're the people who might usurp us. That's eventually what happens. Pharaoh becomes nervous that the Jewish people are going to revolt against him. It all started from a lack of gratitude, and then, of course, the slavery, etc., etc. The genocide, which was also part of it, etc. It all started with a lack of gratitude. So I want to conclude today's lesson by empowering ourselves. We discussed the problem. The problem is that we have an issue with happiness because we don't have enough gratitude. We then introduced the solution: gratitude, more gratitude, right? But now we've introduced the last and final important peg in our discussion for today, which is we also have to acknowledge that as human beings, gratitude is not something that comes natural to us, and it's not something that comes easy to us. But if we can actually start to be a little bit vulnerable, we can start to be a little bit dependent and recognize that we're dependent on God and on others, then we can begin to adopt this attitude of gratitude, which then will lead to all the benefits as a result and the happiness that comes as a result, as elaborated on throughout the lesson. Please turn your attention to video screens for a summary of today's lesson. Although we'll do the exercise after. First, the video.
Lesson 3. 1. When we have been surrounded by a superabundance of blessings since our youth, we tend not to notice the gifts. Hence, the abundance fails to bring us happiness. 2. When we obtain something new, we experience a spike of joy. But as we quickly adapt to the fresh circumstance, the joy withers away. This is why humans have an unquenchable thirst for more, for we crave a repeat of that temporary spike of joy. 3. This desire for more hinders our ability to be happy, for when we are focused on attaining something, we neglect to contemplate the blessings we already have. In addition, the drive for more causes our minds to dwell on the negative, on that which we do not have. 4. When emotions are not verbally expressed, they are diminished and they dissipate. When they are verbally expressed, they flourish and are amplified. By focusing on and talking about the blessings in our lives, we foster happy emotions. By not focusing on that which we are missing, we allow our negative feelings to dissipate. 5. Ritualizing gratitude at fixed intervals allows us to reap the full happiness benefit from that which we have. Judaism has a built-in system of rituals that facilitates a steady expression of gratitude for all the blessings in our lives. 6. We ought to be grateful not only for the gifts we have, but also for the fact that they are provided by someone who cares. Realizing that God and other people love us and care for us is perhaps an even greater source of happiness than the gifts alone. 7. Part of the human psyche is naturally resistant to gratefulness. Gratitude is a humbling experience because it demands that we come to terms with the limits of our self-sufficiency. When, however, we acknowledge our dependence on others and express gratefulness, we open up the gates of joy.
Okay. And now, of course, to the exercise for today. I think you all see where this is going, but you can see it on page 109 in your book if you'd like. The exercise for today is over the next 7 days, try and express gratitude to 2 people. This is exercise A, who have had a positive influence in your life, but whom you have not properly thanked yet. Be specific about what they did and how positively affected you. Be the most amazing phone call that person ever got. Another exercise is during Shabbat dinner. You can go around the table or at any dinner really, but Shabbat is a nice time to do this, and ask everybody that's present to share something for which they're grateful. You could do it yourself, and everybody else can do the same. And the last one is to imagine what life would be like if, God forbid, you did not have some of the things that you take for granted. Your house, your ability to see, to hear, to walk, Helen Keller style, or anything else that currently gives you comfort, and then recite a small prayer thanking God for providing you with that gift. These things go a very, very long way. All right, and we look forward to next week when we are going to be doing the joy of struggle, lesson 4, the joy of struggle, exploiting our shortcomings as sources of happiness. We tend to think of the struggles in our lives and our personal shortcomings as causes of stress. We can flip the script if we think how happiness thinks. See you all then. Thank you all for joining us today.